I was standing behind a linen curtain at my own daughter's wedding, program in my hand, and my name wasn't on it. 60 seconds before those doors opened. 60 seconds. And the woman who'd paid for almost everything in that barn had just been erased from her own daughter's wedding. That was Carol Whitfield's first mistake. Her second, thinking I'd never find out how many times she'd pulled this exact move before. My name's Diane Coleman, 58 years old, been a CPA for 31 years. And here's the thing about spending your whole career doing books. You start noticing when numbers don't add up. Trust me, that's gonna matter a lot here. Welcome back if you're new. Stick around for this one, because by the end, you're gonna watch her mask come all the way off in front of 200 people. If that's your kind of story, hit subscribe. Now let's get into it. Picture a converted rice barn just outside Charleston, South Carolina. String lights strung across old cypress beams, magnolia and candle wax hanging thick in that humid evening air. My daughter Madison, 27, was somewhere behind me getting her veil pinned in. And there I am, holding this cream-colored program, gold foil letters spelling out, "Hosted with love by Richard and Carol Whitfield." My name? Nowhere. Not a trace. Hold on to that image, because everything I'm about to tell you led straight to that exact moment. And none of it happened the way it looked from the outside. Let's back up. 14 months earlier. My phone rings at 11 at night, and it's Maddie crying, but the good kind. The kind you don't apologize for. Ethan Whitfield had just proposed to her on the pier at Folly Beach, and I cried too, sitting alone in my kitchen. But here's the thing. The first thing I thought about wasn't the proposal at all. It was David, my husband. He died 3 years before that call. Regular Tuesday morning, heart attack, no warning, no goodbye. 1 minute he was there, and then he wasn't. One of the last real conversations we ever had was actually about this. Maddie's wedding, someday, whenever that would be. He used to say it half joking, half not. "Whatever it costs, Diane. We're doing it right. That's our girl." After he passed, I was going through his files, and I found this account he'd quietly built over 11 years. Small deposits, disciplined, the kind of saving you only do when you love someone, and you're planning for a future you might not even see yourself. $91,000. And taped right on the passbook, in his handwriting, a little sticky note. For Maddie's day, that was David. Quiet, careful, generous in ways he never once bragged about, so when Maddie called that night, crying, happy, I already knew exactly what that money was for. I told her, "Baby, we've got this covered. Don't even think about the cost. Plan the wedding you actually want." I met Carol Whitfield properly about 2 weeks later. Dinner at this seafood place on East Bay Street, candlelight, harbor right outside the window. She reaches across the table, squeezes my hand, and says the one sentence that basically ran my life for the next 14 months. "Diane, I want you to know. Richard and I insist on splitting everything 50-50. This is our children's wedding. We're partners in this now." And look, I believed her. Completely. Carol was polished, warm in that country club kind of way, the type who compliments your shoes before she's even finished shaking your hand. Richard, her husband, ran a commercial real estate firm and drove a car worth more than my first house. These people had real money. So when Carol said 50-50, I pictured something close to actual 50-50. I had no idea yet what that little promise was going to cost me. First came the venue deposit. $12,000 for the barn and grounds. I sent my half within the week. Carol's half showed up 4 months later, and it wasn't $6,000. It was $3,000, with a little note attached. "This is what we can do right now, hope it helps." I told myself, okay, timing thing. People have cash flow issues. I let it go. Then the catering contract came in, and this is really where I started seeing how Carol operated. $26,000. Plated dinner, 200 guests. Deposits due Friday. I call Carol Wednesday to coordinate. "Oh, absolutely. Send me the invoice. I'll handle it with our accountant," she says. Breezy, certain, already moving on to something else. Friday comes. Nothing from the Whitfields. Caterer calls me directly, because my name's the one on file, so I pay the whole deposit myself rather than lose the vendor. Telling myself again this is a one-time thing. The real 50-50's coming on the bigger stuff. It didn't come. And here's what made it so hard to catch in real time. Carol never failed to pay the same way twice. Sometimes it was a totally believable accident. An invoice she swears she never got. Sometimes it was a delay dressed up as thoughtfulness. Let's not rush this. Weddings shouldn't be about money. And sometimes as the months rolled on, it came wrapped in something sharper. Month 5. Ceremony musicians. Maddie wanted a small string quartet, simple, warm. Carol pushes for a full 6-piece ensemble instead. Says it'll photograph better. Says the upgrade was her idea, so the extra cost's on her. 11 days later, the coordinator calls me, because the deposit never showed. I pay it. $1,800 I hadn't budgeted for. Don't say a word to Carol. That night I'm sitting at my kitchen table, the same one David used to do his Sunday crossword at, and for the first time I open a spreadsheet. Not suspicion, really. Just habit. Same instinct that makes me good at my job. And what I see on that screen turns my stomach in a way the exhaustion never had. Column after column of deposits, and the Whitfield side sitting almost completely empty next to mine. I told myself it'd balance out later, on the bigger stuff. Hang on to that thought, actually. It comes back around in a way that still makes me shake my head. By month 7, I'd basically stopped expecting to get reimbursed and started just documenting instead. Every invoice, every wire transfer, every text where Carol promised to cover something and didn't. I built a folder, digital first, then physical, organized vendor by vendor, because some tired, quiet part of me already knew I'd need it. I had no idea just how badly, and I found that out completely by accident, of all places, at a dress fitting, 6 weeks before the wedding. I'm sitting in the waiting area of this bridal boutique on King Street, while Maddie's in the back for her final alteration, and this other woman sits down next to me. Mid-50s, warm face, clearly waiting on someone too. We start talking the way strangers do in waiting rooms. She mentions her daughter got married 2 years earlier, at the same rice barn actually, and asks if I know Roz, the owner. I say I do, and then she says something that stops me cold. Small world, she laughs, but not really laughing. Funny thing, our daughter's mother-in-law was a Whitfield too. Carol. Lovely woman, publicly, anyway. She and her husband told everyone they'd covered nearly the whole wedding. I paid almost all of it myself, never said a word. Because what was I gonna do? Make a scene at my own daughter's reception? And I'm just sitting there, hands folded in my lap, and I feel something click. Like when a set of books that never quite balanced suddenly makes sense, the second you find that one entry someone tried to hide. This wasn't Carol being disorganized, wasn't just careless with money in some way that happened to hurt me. This was a pattern, a strategy she'd already run once, successfully, and walked away from clean. I wasn't the first mother she'd quietly let carry a wedding while she took the credit. I was just next. I didn't say much else to that woman. Couple of polite questions. Didn't want to tip my hand, not yet, not to a stranger in a bridal shop. But I drove home that afternoon, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. And here's the thing. I didn't do anything that night. Easy to make it sound like I marched straight into action. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table, lights off except the one over the stove, David's photo on the shelf, right where it's been for 3 years. And I just let myself feel it, instead of rushing into a plan. Wasn't rage yet. Something quieter, heavier, grief. Almost for the version of the last year I thought I'd been living, the one where Carol was just overwhelmed, or a little tight with money in some ordinary human way. That version was gone. In its place was a woman who'd built a whole method out of other people's love for their kids, and was running it on me without blinking. I thought about David a long time that night. What he'd say, sitting across from me instead of just smiling from a photograph. He wasn't a loud man. But he had this specific, cold kind of anger. One that only came out when somebody took advantage of a person who trusted them. I sat with that until it steadied me. Then I went to bed, and in the morning, I called Roz. Roz, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. 2 years ago, a Whitfield wedding, similar situation. Does that ring a bell? Long pause on the line, longer than I expected. Diane, I'm not going to gossip about a past client, but I'll say this much. When you asked me last month to keep a clean invoice file on this wedding, I didn't think twice about saying yes. Let's just leave it there. That was answer enough. So I asked her to do what I'd already asked, but with a new kind of urgency behind it now. Keep a complete, itemized folder. Every vendor payment, every deposit, every balance, every name on every receipt. Printed, ready to go the second things went sideways. Roz didn't ask why twice. 2 weeks later, Maddie's bridal shower, Carol's place in Mount Pleasant. Wraparound porch, a chandelier that probably cost more than my whole kitchen renovation. I step into the hallway looking for a bathroom, and I hear Carol's voice through a cracked door, talking to her sister. Well, you know Diane's a widow. Bless her heart, she's doing what she can, but honestly, Richard and I have really had to step up and handle most of it. The big stuff. We just didn't want Maddie to have to worry. I just stood there, didn't move. And this time, it didn't shock me the way it would have a month earlier. Just confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was a script. One Carol had clearly used before, on another mother, in another hallway, at another shower, close enough to word for word that it made my skin crawl. I didn't confront her that day. Maddie was in the next room, glowing, opening gifts, laughing with her cousins, 3 weeks from the happiest day of her life. I wasn't about to be the mother who caused a scene over some conversation in a hallway. So I smiled, found the bathroom, went back to the party, but something in me had finished shifting, quietly, for good month 12. Letterpress invitations, $4,200. Carol's idea, Carol's insistence, Carol's word that the upgrade over standard printing was on her. The boutique owner calls me 11 days before the mailing deadline, because that money never showed up. I pay it. Don't say a word to anyone. Invitations go out on time. Maddie never even knows there was a problem, which, by that point, I'd figured was kind of the whole design. That same week, the florist's upgraded package comes due in full. Garden roses instead of the standard arrangement. Hanging installations over the head table. $3,000 over the original quote. All Carol's picks. All under that same promise. Don't worry, I'll handle the difference. Her actual contribution when the final invoice lands, 4 days before the wedding? $400. Sent almost cheerfully, like it's a gift instead of a fraction of what she owed. I pay the balance sitting in my car on my lunch break, hands steady, jaw tight, thinking about that woman from the boutique and her tired little laugh. That same week, Maddie calls me. There's this edge in her voice I don't recognize at first. Mom, can I ask you something? Carol mentioned you weren't really able to cover as much as you'd hoped for the wedding. Is everything okay, financially? I don't want you to feel bad, I just want to understand. And I go completely still, phone in my hand, because here it is. The part I hadn't fully seen coming. Carol wasn't just taking credit behind my back with adults who'd never repeat it to Maddie. She was building an actual story for my own daughter, painting herself as the generous one, swooping in for a struggling widow, and painting me as the one who couldn't quite pull her weight. Every quiet overrun I'd covered, she flipped into proof of my inadequacy instead of her failure to pay. I told Maddie I was fine. Everything was handled. We'd talk properly after the wedding. I wasn't protecting Carol, understand that. I was protecting the 1 week of my daughter's life that was supposed to be about joy. Not her mother and her future mother-in-law duking it out over a spreadsheet 3 weeks before the ceremony. Now, if you were in my position right there, phone still warm in your hand, would you have told her the truth right then? Or waited, like I did, till after the wedding? Let me know down in the comments, because what I did next is really what turned everything around. I hung up and called Roz right back. I need the full folder ready by Friday, I told her. Every invoice, every transfer, organized by vendor and date. Already 3/4 done, she said. I had a feeling. 2 days before the wedding, rehearsal dinner, private room above a restaurant on the Battery, harbor lights out the window. Richard corners me near the bar, glass of scotch in hand. Diane, I want you to know how much Carol and I appreciate everything you've put into this, he says. Warm, a little too warm, honestly. The tone of a guy closing a deal he hasn't actually looked at closely. It really has been a true partnership. And here's the thing about Richard. I'd figured out over those 14 months, he wasn't cruel, he was just absent. Like the kind of husband writes big checks for his own comfort and just trusts his wife to handle the details. Never once asked what those details actually cost, or who was covering the gap. I could have said nothing. Instead, I said quietly, Richard, has Carol ever actually shown you the vendor invoices? The real totals, not just the summary. He blinks, caught off guard. I mean, generally. We've been splitting things. Ask her to show you the real numbers sometime, I said. Not tonight, just sometime. Smiled the way you smile at a rehearsal dinner. Went to find Maddie, that little conversation? That was the second thing I set in motion, right alongside the folder with Roz. A tiny seed of doubt planted in the one person in that whole household who actually controlled the money and who'd never once had a reason to look closely at where it was going. The morning of the wedding starts quiet. Before any of what's coming, I drive over to the bed and breakfast where Maddie spent the night with her bridesmaids. Low white house, wrap-around porch, and I find her alone at the vanity in the front bedroom, still in her robe. Hair half done, morning light coming through the lace curtains, landing right across her shoulders. Mom, she says, catching my eyes in the mirror. Come do my necklace. Nobody else does the clasp right. I cross the room, fasten that little gold chain David gave her for her 16th birthday. The one she insisted on wearing, even though it doesn't technically match anything else. My hands are steadier than I expect. I look at her reflection, 27 years old, about to become somebody's wife, and for one long, uncomplicated minute, none of it matters. Not the invoices, not the hallway conversation, not the woman in the bridal boutique with her tired laugh. Just, it's my daughter, a clasp, a quiet room full of morning light. You think Dad would like him? She asks, still watching me in the mirror instead of turning around. He'd have made Ethan sweat through 3 separate conversations before he admitted it, I say. But yeah, he'd love him. She laughs, touches the necklace once it's fastened, and for a second, I actually think about telling her everything right there. About Carol, the money, the story she'd been fed for over a year. I think about it for maybe 4 heartbeats. Then I let it go, like I had a dozen times already. There'd be a kitchen table for this later. A cold cup of coffee. Time. Today was for the clasp. The light. The girl in the mirror who still, in some small unguarded corner of herself, looked exactly like she did at 16. I leave her with her bridesmaids. Drive to the barn early, ahead of schedule. The way I do most things. Which is how I end up alone near the entrance table, when the box of printed programs shows up. Cream cardstock tied in little ribbon stacks. And that's how I end up being the one who picks one up first, just turning it over, out of nothing more than idle curiosity. And that brings us right back to where I started. Standing behind a linen curtain, holding a program with gold foil letters that read, Hosted with Love by Richard and Carol Whitfield. My name nowhere on the page. And for the first time, really feeling the full weight of what that erasure meant. And how many times before mine it had already happened. I find Carol near the gift table, fussing with a centerpiece like she owns the whole evening. And I ask her, quietly, to step outside with me for a second. Carol, I say, once we're alone by the side entrance. The program lists you and Richard as the hosts. My name isn't anywhere on it. She smiles, that same practiced warmth. Oh, Diane, I didn't think it needed to be that formal. It's really just a nice gesture since we handled so much of the heavier costs. You didn't handle the heavier costs, I say. Calm. I have every invoice from this wedding, Carol. Every deposit. Every balance you said you'd cover and never did. Her smile flickers. Resets. I really don't think tonight's the night to relitigate who paid for what. Maddie doesn't need that energy right before she walks down the aisle. I agree completely, I say. Which is exactly why I'm not bringing it up to her. I'm bringing it up to you. You're being dramatic, Carol says, and the warmth just drops right out of her voice. We've been incredibly generous with this family. Frankly, I think you should be grateful. Instead of standing here accusing me of something, grateful. I let that word sit there a second. I paid the venue deposit, in full. I paid the catering balance. I paid for the ensemble upgrade you promised and never covered. I paid for the letterpress invitations you insisted on. I paid the florist's final invoice 4 days ago. Every upgrade you approved, while you sent $400. And I know about the wedding 2 years ago too, Carol. I met the mother of that bride at a dress fitting. She told me almost exactly what you told your sister in that hallway at the shower. Word for word, practically. That lands. I watch it land, the composure actually cracking, just for a second. Something flickering behind her eyes that looks, for the first time in 14 months, like actual fear instead of performance. That is not, she starts. That has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with it, I say. This isn't carelessness, Carol. This is something you do. She recovers fast the way people like Carol always do. Arms crossed, voice going hard and clipped. You have no idea what you're talking about. And if you make a scene tonight, in front of Maddie, in front of 200 people, you're the one she's gonna remember as difficult, not me. I let that sit a beat. Because in its own ugly way, it was the most honest thing Carol had said to me in 14 months. I'm not gonna make a scene, I say. The program's already printed. I just wanted you to know that I know. What happens next is up to you. I walk back inside and leave her standing there. And I'll be honest with you, my hands were shaking by the time I got to the door, not from fear. From the sheer exhaustion of finally saying something out loud to her face. After carrying it silently for over a year, I stand just inside the entrance a second before heading back to the reception, steadying myself against the doorframe, and I find myself thinking about that woman from the bridal boutique again. Her tired laugh. What was I gonna do? Make a scene at my own daughter's reception. I get it now. Completely. How easy it would have been to swallow mine too. Smile through dinner, let the program stand, never say a word. Kind of admired in this bitter way how well the whole thing was built to keep women like us quiet. Almost. Then I smooth my dress, check my reflection in a dark window, and go find my daughter. Here's what Carol didn't know. Roz had already built a little addition into that evening's program, tucked right into the toast segment after the best man and maid of honor spoke. Something Carol had zero idea was coming. The reception rolls forward. Dinner. First dance. Maddie glowing under those string lights, completely unaware of what happened 20 minutes earlier by the side door. I watch her laughing at something, Ethan whispers, and for a few minutes, none of it matters. Not the invoices, not the folder, not the woman from the boutique. That's the strange thing about a night like that one. Even in the middle of a betrayal, there's still real, uncomplicated joy sitting right there in the room, and I let myself have every bit of it. Then Roz steps up to the little stage with the microphone, right after the best man's toast. Exactly where the schedule had it planned. Before we move into the next part of the evening, she says, warm, easy, the voice of someone who's done this 100 times. I want to take a minute, on behalf of the venue, to properly thank the people who made tonight possible. We keep detailed vendor records here, and every so often, it's worth saying the real names next to the real numbers, instead of just letting a program speak for itself. She glances at a little card in her hand. Tonight's celebration, at a total cost, just over $94,000, was made possible in overwhelming part, more than $87,000 of it, by Diane Coleman, mother of the bride. Every deposit, every balance, every invoice that kept this evening standing. We're also noting a contribution from Richard and Carol Whitfield of just over $7,000. She smiles, sets the card down. We think the people who build something deserve to have their name on it. So, Diane, would you stand up for us? Here's the crazy part. I didn't know that was coming. Roz hadn't told me. I stood up, slow, in front of 200 people, and the room did something I wasn't expecting. It applauded, not politely. Really applauded, the kind that makes your ears go hot. And somewhere behind me I heard one of Richard's uncles say, loud enough to carry, well, there it is then. And this is where it gets interesting. Carol's face went white, not pale. White. The color actually draining out of it in real time. Her hand was still wrapped around her wine glass, and it started shaking hard enough that she had to set it down before she dropped it. She tried to smile, tried to hold the room the way she always did. And for the first time in 14 months, it just didn't work. Her mouth opened like she was about to say something, laugh it off, spin it, and nothing came out. She pushed back her chair so fast it nearly tipped, mumbled something about needing air, and walked straight out through the side door I'd stood at with her 20 minutes earlier. Nobody stopped her. Richard didn't stand up and defend her. Didn't stand up at all. Just sat there, completely still, staring at the number on that little card like it was written in a language he'd only just learned to read. When I looked at him again a minute later, his eyes were wet. Ethan leaned over to Maddie, quiet, and I watched my daughter's face change, right there, in real time. Confused first. Then something harder. Something I recognized, because I'd been wearing it myself for 14 months. She found me 20 minutes later, out by the parking lot, still in her dress. Is it true? She said. Not really a question. I told her the truth right there, sooner than I'd planned, because there was no version of that night left where I could hand her a fairy tale. Not all of it. Not the woman from the boutique yet. Not the full pattern. But enough. The invoices. The overruns. The story Carol had been telling her for over a year. Now, Maddie didn't stay calm. I want to be honest about that, because it'd be easy to make it sound tidier than it was. She cried, hard, right there in the gravel lot in her wedding dress. And it wasn't pretty crying. It was the kind that comes up from somewhere old. She made me doubt you, Maddie said, voice breaking. On my own wedding day, she made me wonder if my mother could barely afford to show up. And the whole time, you were the one holding this entire night together. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, furious at herself for crying, furious at Carol, and underneath all of it, grieving something. The version of her mother-in-law she'd wanted to believe in. She went and found Carol in that parking lot before the night was over. I didn't follow her. She told me about it after in pieces over the weeks that came. She said she didn't scream, said she didn't need to, said she just told Carol plainly that she knew now, all of it, and that Carol would never again get to stand in a room and let people believe a story that wasn't true. Carol didn't deny it, apparently, just stood there, arms wrapped around herself under the parking lot lights, and said, I didn't think it would matter this much. Which Maddie told me was, in its own way, the most honest thing Carol had ever said to her. But here's what happened next. Richard's turnaround didn't happen that night. I want to be straight about that too, because it'd be easy to make it sound tidier than it actually was. The first version of Richard I got, 2 days later, was a man still defending his wife. He called me, and he wasn't apologetic. He was almost angry. Carol says you blindsided her in front of the entire family, that the numbers Roz used were incomplete, that there were cash contributions that never got logged. I let him talk, didn't argue. Just told him, calmly, that every receipt was still sitting in a folder. He was welcome to go through every single one himself, vendor by vendor, and check it against whatever Carol had told him. He took me up on it. Took him 9 days. He called the caterer himself. Called the florist. Drove out to the letterpress boutique and sat across from the owner and asked her directly whether a difference payment had ever come through from a Whitfield card. It hadn't. He found the ensemble coordinator's original deposit email, still sitting in Carol's own inbox, unanswered for 11 days before I'd quietly paid it myself. Piece by piece, the story Carol had been telling him for 14 months came apart in his own hands. Not mine. He called me on the 10th day, and this time there was nothing left of the man who'd cornered me at the rehearsal dinner with his scotch and his easy confidence. His voice was flat, worn down. I didn't want to believe it, he said. I kept thinking there had to be an explanation that made this make sense. There wasn't one. I went through everything myself because I needed to be the one who found it, not just the one who was told. Long pause. I'm sending you a check for the real difference. Every dollar backdated. It won't undo the year. But I needed you to hear that I checked. I didn't just take your word for it. The check came 4 days later, $40,000. The number that finally made the math between our two families equal. What Carol lost, she lost slowly, and she lost it for real. Richard moved into the guest room for the better part of 2 months, something Maddie told me about carefully, like she wasn't sure she should. Ethan, her own son, stopped taking her calls for a while, not out of cruelty. He told his mother plainly he needed time before he could sit across from her without thinking about what she'd let his wife believe. The extended family that used to hear Carol's version of things at every gathering just stopped hearing it. Richard, quietly, without asking anyone's permission, started correcting the record himself whenever her name came up. The reckoning finally landed in public at Thanksgiving, 7 months later, at a table crowded with the whole extended family. Someone, one of Richard's cousins, mentioned kindly how generous Whitfields had been with the wedding. And this time it wasn't Carol who answered first. It was Ethan. Mom didn't cover the wedding, he said, plainly, no anger in it, just fact. Diane did, almost all of it. It's time everyone actually knew that. The table went quiet. Carol's face went through something complicated, and then, for the first time, in front of every single person who'd ever heard her version of the story, she said it herself. That's true. I let people believe something that wasn't. I'm sorry. It wasn't smooth. Her voice caught on the word sorry, like it was a size too small for her mouth. But she said it, out loud, in the one room, built entirely out of the reputation she'd spent 14 months protecting, and there was no taking it back once it was said. Wasn't loud. Nobody clapped this time, but it was real. And it cost her something she couldn't quietly walk back from later, the way she'd walked back everything else. If this story hit close to home for you, if you've ever quietly carried something while somebody else walked off with the credit for it, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and the bell, so you don't miss the next one. I still have that program. The one with the gold foil letters, my name missing from it. It's tucked in the back of that same folder, right behind Richard's check. And behind that sits one more thing, a receipt from a bridal boutique waiting room, where some stranger's tired laugh told me more, in 5 minutes, than 14 months of watching Carol ever did. I don't keep it out of bitterness. I keep it as proof of how close the truth came to disappearing completely, and how many other mothers before me might have just let it. My name wasn't on that page, but it was on every single check that actually made that evening real. And in the end, that's the only ledger that ever mattered.